Welcome back to The Promised Seed. Today, we're diving into the work of Christ and asking what got Christ killed and what does God do with a dead Jesus? To help us with this topic, please welcome back Sarah, our theological expert.
In this episode, we're going to turn our focus from talking about the person of Christ, as illustrated in the creeds, to the work of Christ. That means we're not so interested today in the historical development of church doctrine and technical descriptions of Jesus' substance and nature, but rather what got Christ killed and what his death and resurrection accomplished. In other words, in this episode, we'll begin to explore what systematic theologians categorize as the work of Christ.
Excellent. Let's get into it. I know there's something to the meaning of gospel that's significant here, right?
Yes, the story about Jesus is called the Gospel. Gospel is a shortened version of the Old English phrase good spell or good story. This is a translation of the Greek word euangelion, which means good news.
All right, so that's the literal meaning. But there's more to it than that, I take it.
Knowing the literal meaning of the word is one thing, but knowing the content of the news is another. In fact, as we can see in the writings of the Apostle Paul, the actual content of the news has been in dispute from the earliest days, so much so that the purpose of many of Paul's letters was to clarify and correct various communities' misunderstandings of the gospel.
I think you mentioned there's an example of this dispute in one of Paul's letters.
Yes, a case in point is found in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 1, verses 17 to 18. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God.
That's intense. So, the crucifixion is at the heart of the gospel?
Exactly. Paul is quite clear that central to the gospel of Jesus is his crucifixion. He's also clear that this is a scandal and foolishness. Why? Well, crucifixion by nature does not seem like very good news.
But it's essential, right? That's what makes it the power of God?
Yep. Paul's emphasis on Christ's crucifixion is reflected in all four gospel narratives. In fact, the Gospels themselves can be said to be organized as passion narratives with extended introductions. Everything before the Passion tells us who this person is who's on the cross. His birth, baptism, preaching, healing, and miracles, along with the conflicts and questions that surround him, give us insight into his life and ministry. Yet, those can all be considered as prelude. Everything Jesus did moved toward his death and resurrection. Everything led to the cross and empty tomb. But the question is, why? Why did Jesus die, and what got him killed?
A powerful question. So when we talk about the work of Christ, we're asking,
what concerns us here is the work of Christ and the effect of his work. What exactly did Jesus become human to do? Why did God send the Son into the world? What was he to accomplish? And finally, how does his work affect the world?
I know many have tried to answer those questions in different ways. What do we call these theories?
As Christians throughout the centuries have grappled with these questions, we can see a few commonalities in the way they've attempted to provide answers. These attempts are generally called atonement theories. Atonement theories can be appealing because they do tend to try to make sense of what Jesus was doing on the cross by use of logic. Look a little more closely at these theories, however, and you'll see some of the underlying questions the atonement theories are attempting to resolve. Questions such as these: does God in Jesus go to the cross for us, or does Jesus do it for God on our behalf? Is God propitiated, satisfied, or in some way changed by the cross? Is God wrathful? Does God need Christ's work in order to become merciful? Does God need the cross, or do we? Keep these questions in mind as you listen to the upcoming episodes on specific atonement theories.
And it sounds like the fact that we have so many theories is part of the problem, right?
Yes, keep in mind the reality that while it can be intellectually challenging and even stimulating to engage in arguments about various atonement theories, the simple fact that there are so many theories and so many arguments indicates a real problem. Put simply, the very fact that Christians have not been able to settle on one theory or model is evidence on its face that no theory will be able to solve the problems they are attempting to solve. And modern-day attempts to get around that very real problem by claiming each atonement theory provides a small piece or facet of the whole puzzle is equally disingenuous.
So, in a sense, we're trying to make sense of something that resists our human logic?
Exactly. As you'll hear in the episodes on specific atonement theories, and as you've heard in the episodes on the person of Christ and the various heresies surrounding his humanity and divinity, the root issue is the same. Attempts to keep Christ in the law, to explain and understand Christ rationally or logically, are doomed to failure because our human capacity to reason must finally end at Jesus. God becoming human is not logical because the finite and the infinite cannot logically exist fully in the same person. God dying on the cross is not logical because the very definition of God is that God cannot die.
And Paul himself calls this folly, right?
Yes, this is precisely what the Apostle Paul was saying in 1 Corinthians, and with which we began this episode. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. In closing, what should our listeners keep in mind?
In the upcoming episodes, we'll analyze various theories people have proposed about the work of Christ and how it saves. And don't be surprised if you find yourself concluding with Luther that all such attempts are a fool's errand in a vain effort to remove the scandal of the cross.